So this slide illustrates the obesity rates in Europe, revealing a notable contrast with the United States, where obesity rates tend to be a lot higher. On average, the obesity rates in Europe range from approximately 23 to about 25%, indicating a lower prevalence compared to the US. However, there are variations among European countries, with some countries reporting higher obesity rates than others. So we can see places like Turkey, Malta, and the UK that have the higher obesity rates, and other places like your Bosnia and Switzerland have lower obesity rates. And this data provides insights into trends observed in relatively highly developed countries such as the US, North America, Europe, and Korea. It suggests that the issue of obesity is not only unique in the US alone, but is prevalent across developed regions worldwide. And this data we see is collected from your 1970s to your 2020. And these findings really does indicate a concerning trend of increasing obesity rates in the developed world. So one of the reasons why WHO is concerned is how risk transition has changed over time. And there are traditional health risks in rural and underdeveloped communities, which are your low and lower middle income countries. And the problem there is usually associated with not getting enough calories rather than consuming too many calories. These communities often lack carbs, but they are very active with high calorie consumption needs and are usually very impoverished as well. Indoor air pollution is a significant concern, particularly in developing countries where women cook on open fires and use charcoals inside their homes, and that leads to a higher risk of developing lung disease and cancer. In areas lacking proper water treatment facilities, sanitation and water quality issues arise. Over time, this risk may diminish as education improves and ventilation methods are adopted, sanitation facilities become more accessible. However, with that, new risks emerge, such as tobacco use, as people gain more disposable income and purchase cigarettes, contributing to also air pollution issues from cars, factories, and occupational hazards. Also, as people become wealthier, their diets become richer. They engage in less physical labor and adopt more sedentary lifestyles, relying on cars, public transportation, and modern appliances like washing machines, dryers, also your dishwashing machines. And so, these are some of the challenges that are faced in the developed world. So this slide shows the estimated annual number of deaths attributed to each risk factor. And we notice that obesity is one of the top six. Similarly, as well, we can correlate that with diets that are low in vegetables, diet that's low in fruits, the lack of physical activity, and how these dietary and lifestyle factors affect your various kinds of diseases, which are basically can be controlled by just altering your diets and lifestyle. Also, over here, we notice that we can break them down into your low income and high income population groups. And what we notice is that, especially in your high income countries, we see that non communicable diseases make up the majority of your causes of death, which is very, very much attributed again to your diet and lifestyle. Whereas your low and low income countries, the significant proportion comes from infectious, neonatal, maternal diseases, as well as nutritional diseases, but that oftentimes relates back to malnutrition or hidden hunger, not exclusive breastfeeding, iron deficiency, protein energy malnutrition. So we see how different countries have different types of risk factor. And as countries start to emerge and they start getting richer, we notice that that increased meat consumption, decreased physical activity, and we also notice in your middle income countries, the predominant cause of that comes from your non-communicable diseases. If you examine the proportion of overweight individuals, typically defined as those with a BMI between 25, and using that measure again in OECD countries, The average proportion of overweight individuals stands at around 50%. This means that 50% of the adult population in developed countries are considered overweight rather than normal weight. And looking at some other countries, such as the developing and moderately developing nations like Brazil, South Africa, and Mexico, they exhibit similar levels or even higher incidences of being overweight. However, when we consider countries like India and China, we observe a relatively low proportion of overweight adults. And this provides valuable perspectives of the obesity issue in these countries. Essentially, in both India and China, there exists a wealthy urban population alongside a rural poor population. And the rural population tend not to be overweight, while the wealthy urban population demonstrates traditional economic development rates. And we look at the amount of overweight individuals at about, it stands at about 25% in China. What we're witnessing in China in terms of research is that the rural population is beginning to shrink as people migrate to urban areas, and a trend similarly observed in India. However, if we focus on the middle class living in cities, their obesity rates align closely with those of the Western world. Therefore, if economic development continues to progress in India and China, it's likely that the population will become more overweight and experience higher levels of obesity. And this trend holds true across the board in developing countries, including the Caribbean and the rest of the developing world, where we notice that higher rates of obesity are rising. What is common in other countries is that women tend to have a greater tendency to gain weight due to lifestyle choices, food preferences, and activity levels. And we can notice this as well in the Bahamas, for example, where the study was done. What we'll also notice is that women oftentimes have more sedentary occupations in less developed countries, and they also have greater access to calories. Additionally, we also have to take into consideration your genetic differences that might play a role, and women are, of course, a lot more likely to gain weight compared to men. So this slide illustrates the obesity rates in Pakistan, highlighting the difference between rural and urban populations. Typically, individuals residing in rural areas are observed to be less obese than those living in urban areas. And what we notice is that in rural Pakistan, individuals often grow their own food, which tends to be lower in calories, fat, and sugar. They also have limited access to fast food and grocery stores. Additionally, they lead an active lifestyle, and that helps to contribute to lower obesity rates. The urban population, on the other hand, they are most likely to have sedentary lifestyles, limited access to healthy food options, so they kind of rely on cheap, high-fat, high-salt, high-calorie food that are available in your convenience stores and fast food outlets. Also, the access to fresh fruit and vegetables are limited, and grocery stores in the inner cities may not offer healthy options. And so that's why when we look at the urban, the graph over here, we see that there's a higher rate of obesity among your urban population. Also, when looking at your age group, we notice that there are women significantly higher rates of obesity. And this data again illustrates the differences in your obesity rates in China, and particularly that's been focusing on your larger cities. And over the past 20 years, there has been a significant increase in obesity rates in China. For example, in 2000, there's about 16% of boys that were overweight or obese who were living in larger cities compared to around 10% of girls. And that was a notable difference from the 1990s. And what we're seeing is that, and it's attributed largely to economic developments as individuals transition from rural areas to urban centers. They gain access to public transportation and a wide variety of food options. As a result, their diets have shifted towards increased consumption of fat and sugar, as well as your meat consumption. This slide shows the share of children and adolescents aged 5 to 19 years old that are defined as either overweight and obese. And what we're noticing is that the US exhibits a high prevalence of overweight and obesity across that age group, where about anywhere from about 50% of the kids are either overweight or obese. We also notice that in places like Australia, also has significant higher rates of obesity. We see that in Europe, it's slowly catching up. It's anywhere from about 20 to about 30%. And we can see even in the Middle East, it demonstrates relatively high levels of overweight and obesity. Sub-Saharan Africa is the one that notably stands out, largely due to issues such as undernutrition among children in this region. But if we notice, even in Southeast Asia and in certain parts of Asia, that number is rapidly increasing, the number of kids who are overweight or either obese. So this graph depicts overweight levels in 10-year-old children across different countries, allowing for comparisons between your boys and girls. And there appears to be a more consistent increase in overweight prevalence among girls compared to your boys. If you look at some of the differences in Asian countries where the blue bars kind of are further out, for example, if we look at Hong Kong, okay, what we notice is that there are about 20% of the boys who are overweight versus 10% girls. We see Singapore and we see also in Japan similar incidences. Why do you think that is? And this actually has a lot to do with cultural practices where boys are more favored over girls. And the same sort of thing is going on in Hungary as well. Boys are getting more access to calories. They are a lot more spoiled. Not to say that the girls are undernourished, but it's just that cultural practices where boys are favored over girls. What we are seeing over here is the prevalence of obesity rates around the world, based on gender. And what we noticed that in 1975, the obesity rates were and less than 5%, anywhere from about 7%. But in 2016, fast forward, we are noticing that obesity rates have significantly increased, and it could be as high as 25% in places like North America. And we are noticing that it's just increasing worldwide. We can see similarly in Brazil, throughout South America, just higher rates of overweight and obesity compared to those moderately developed countries. And what we're noticing is that it's going to keep increasing, especially with the access to convenience foods and also increased disposable incomes. So this slide is just showing the daily supply of calories per person and how has that changed from 1947 to 2018. And what we know is that currently we are producing a lot more food. And with that, the average amount of calories that is available to people has also been increasing globally. And when there's more food available, technically your food prices should be lower. But it does not always work that way. What we are seeing is that certain parts of the world, people have a lot more access to cheap, calorie-dense food. For example, in America, people are consuming about 3,700 calories, where it should be anywhere from about 2,000 to 2,500 calories for men, depending on your age and depending on the activity levels. If you look at the world, it's about 2,700 calories. But we looked at places like Kenya and Uganda, and we noticed that that is actually a lot more lower. But across the board, we see just an increased amount of calorie intakes per person from the 1940s to year 2018. So we can actually pull out some of these changes in population over time. What we notice over here is that vegetable oil consumption has gone up significantly throughout the developing world as agricultural input into vegetable oil has gone up. So that makes the product a lot more cheaper. But also, as people get wealthier, they can afford to buy a lot more vegetable fat for consumption. So we see the increase in the amount of vegetable oil that people are consuming in places like China, in India, also in Malaysia and Thailand. So this diagram is from an older study, but the results of the study still holds true to today. What they're looking at is how people's diet changes as they get wealthier. The bottom is the percentage of calories, and that's actually contributing to that part of the diet. And the horizontal lines over here shows the contribution of various starches and carbohydrate, such as your potato, wheat, rice, corn, that makes up the bulk of the diet, especially at the bottom of the graph. And if you're looking at the graph, as you go up, people's income starts to rise. And so as it goes up, the amount of calories is also going up. And if you're poor, most of the calories are coming from your simple carbohydrates such as your rice and wheat. But if you look over here, as the income starts to rise, most of the calories are coming from fats, animal fats, basically. And what we notice over here as well, the amount of vegetable protein starts to decrease, but the amount of animal protein starts to increase with increasing wealth. We also notice that as people get richer, the amount of carbohydrate goes down, but the amount of simple sugars, the amount of animal protein and animal fat goes up. And it's true across the board, and we know that as people get wealthier, they shift from a predominantly or plant-based diet where meat is featured maybe once or twice a week to a more animal based diet. So a lot more, meat in comparison. And this graph really just kind of spells it out. So this is a complex graph, but it illustrates the actual calorie content of different food items represented on the horizontal axis, while the vertical axis shows the total amount of food consumed. It provides an indication of the relative calorie density per unit weight of food for each item. Essentially, the different boxes represent various types of food. A denotes your fast food, which is very calorie dense, anywhere from about 800 to about 1,600 calories. So if a person chooses to eat fast food, they will need to consume less of it compared to traditional foods, such as those that are found in the study which was conducted in Gambia. Or they should also opt for supermarket healthy choices. In the middle is your ready-to-eat meals, and typically they are bought from a supermarket or deli. And traditionally, your foods, from traditional foods in Gambia, they generally have a lower calorie content, as we notice, and in comparison to your fast food, which has a higher calorie content. So therefore, if a person aims to consume the same amount of calories, they would need to eat a lot less fast food. And this is a conclusion that may not come as a surprise. However, when we consider the scenario when an individual switches from a traditional diet characterized by larger volumes of less calorie dense traditional food to a city lifestyle with greater access to fast food, and so despite maintaining the same appetite and food consumption habits, the individual now consumes more calorie dense food. As a result, they may not maintain their weight, but instead gain weight due to increased calorie intake. And this is an interesting newspaper headline from the Shanghai Daily News. The same problem in China that we're seeing in the US. Too many fat kids eat too much fast food and sit on their fat butts. I think this just kind of sums it all. And finally, this is a study that was conducted in Yale University, focused on students in the Middle East, specifically in the UAE, United Arab Emirates, which was looking at examining their weight status and related behaviors. It investigated whether the presence of a maid at home, sedentary lifestyle habits, family history of obesity, watching television, smoking status correlated with obesity. Interestingly, the students without a maid at home, they were more likely to be underweight, highlighting a possible link between household dynamics and weight status. Also, a sedentary lifestyle, as indicated by excessive TV watching, was associated with higher likelihood of being overweight. And surprisingly, non-smokers had a lower prevalence of obesity compared to smokers, contradicting the common belief that smoking helps to control weight. Also, the data revealed that being more physically active, whether through sports or choosing active transportation methods, was associated with lower risk of obesity. And so, with that, I will end here.